The crowd gathered at the Tactical Medical Training Center buzzed with excitement, all eyes fixed on a fully equipped combat medic. A small boy with a baseball cap covering his chemotherapy-thin hair inched to the front row. No one expected the astonishing moment that would follow. It was a crisp autumn morning at Fort Benning's Tactical Medical Training Center, where the sun glinted off the modern training facility's windows. The sprawling complex, known for producing the military's finest combat medics, had opened its doors for a rare public demonstration of battlefield medical rescue techniques. Tourists, military families, and curious locals formed tight clusters behind safety barriers, their anticipation palpable as they awaited the start of the special demonstration. Military precision was on full display. Instructors in desert camouflage uniforms moved with calculated efficiency, preparing equipment and checking positions. Among the sea of strangers stood 8-year-old Jackson, his thin frame swallowed by an oversized Atlanta Braves baseball cap and a jacket that hung loosely on his shoulders. His mother, Sarah, a woman with tired but hopeful eyes, stood protectively behind him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. "You doing okay, buddy?" she whispered, bending down. Jackson nodded, his eyes never leaving the training ground where combat medics were assembling in formation. Jackson had been battling leukemia for nearly 2 years. The treatments had taken their toll. His once energetic body now tired easily, and his baseball cap concealed the most visible sign of his chemotherapy. But today, his eyes sparkled with excitement. Ever since his uncle, an army medic who had served in Afghanistan, had given him a toy medical kit, Jackson had dreamed of seeing real combat medics in action. "Did you think they'll show how they help wounded soldiers?" Jackson asked, his voice tinged with wonder. "I'm sure they will, honey," Sarah replied, squeezing his shoulder gently. As the minutes ticked by, more spectators arrived, crowding around the barriers. Jackson, already small for his age, found himself surrounded by a forest of adult legs and torsos. Each time he craned his neck to see, someone taller would shift position, blocking his view again. Sarah noticed her son's frustration as he stood on tiptoes, trying desperately to glimpse the medics. She politely asked nearby adults if her son could move forward, but in the excitement of the moment, her requests went largely unheard. Jackson's heart sank a little, but his determination remained. The combat medic at the front of the formation, standing motionless with his medical pack and tactical gear, seemed like a superhero to the boy, distant, yet inspiring in that sea of chaos. The atmosphere shifted when a man with multiple professional cameras and a press badge pushed through the crowd, his movement aggressive and entitled. "Coming through. Official press," he announced loudly, though his credentials looked no different from those of other media representatives who were respectfully maintaining their positions. The photographer, barrel-chested with an expensive camera hanging from his neck, spotted the small opening near Jackson and immediately began working his way toward it. Sarah felt her son press back against her legs as the man approached. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, "but my son can't see over everyone. Could you please?" "Look, lady," the photographer cut her off, not bothering to lower his voice, "I'm covering this for a major publication. This isn't some field trip." He gestured dismissively toward Jackson. "I need this spot for the shots." Several nearby spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. A middle-aged veteran wearing a Desert Storm cap frowned disapprovingly, but said nothing. The photographer positioned himself directly in front of Jackson, effectively creating a wall between the boy and his view of the demonstration. Jackson tugged at his mother's sleeve, his eyes pleading for help. "Sir," Sarah tried again, her voice firmer but still restrained. "My son is going through cancer treatment. This means a lot to him. Could you please share the space?" The photographer barely glanced back. "Cancer, huh? That's tough, kid, but this is my job." He raised his camera and began snapping photos, his elbows jutting out to claim even more space. Jackson's shoulders slumped. The combat medic he'd been watching, tall, disciplined, with focused eyes visible beneath his tactical helmet, was now completely obscured from view. On the training ground, the lead combat medic maintained his position, eyes forward, stance unwavering. But those who were watching carefully might have noticed his gaze shift slightly toward the commotion at the barrier. Army training demanded that he remain focused on the demonstration about to begin. Breaking concentration was against protocol, especially during public events designed to showcase military precision and discipline. The tension at the barrier continued to build. A woman nearby muttered, "Someone should say something," while others shifted uncomfortably. Jackson, meanwhile, tried to peer around the photographer, his small hand clutching the miniature American flag he'd brought, his knuckles white with determination. The situation deteriorated when the demonstration officially began. The commanding officer's voice boomed through the speakers, explaining the importance of battlefield medicine and how these elite medics train to save lives under the most extreme conditions. Jackson's excitement momentarily overshadowed his disappointment as he strained to hear, even if he couldn't see. Noticing the boys' renewed interest, the photographer's behavior took a cruel turn. "Hey, kid," he said loudly, drowning out the announcement. "You really think these guys are something special? It's all rehearsed, nothing like real combat." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "Please stop talking to my son that way." But the man continued, seemingly enjoying the power he held over them. "What's with the hat, anyway?" "Baseball fan." He reached toward Jackson's cap, camera poised. "Let me get a shot of the brave cancer kid. That'll sell better than these military robots going through their motions." Jackson recoiled, both hands flying up to hold his cap in place. "No, please don't." The panic in his voice was clear. At school, he'd been teased mercilessly the one time his bare head had been exposed. "Come on, just one shot," the photographer insisted, his camera uncomfortably close to Jackson's face. "Let people see what real courage looks like, not these programmed soldiers." Sarah stepped between them. "That's enough. Leave him alone." Her protective instinct overrode her usual composure. The commotion caught the attention of others around them. The veteran in the Desert Storm cap stepped forward. "Back off, buddy." The kid said no. The photographer scoffed. "Everyone's a hero, huh? Just like these medics, following scripts, pretending they're saving the world." On the training ground, the lead combat medic, Staff Sergeant Rivera, continued his demonstration stance. With 8 years of service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, Rivera had treated wounds under enemy fire and evacuated injured soldiers from collapsed buildings. The discipline ingrained through years of training kept him statuesque, but his peripheral vision registered the growing disturbance. The photographer, emboldened by the attention, made one final attempt to remove Jackson's cap. "Come on, kid. Show us what you're hiding. These soldiers show their scars. Why can't you?" Jackson's eyes welled with tears. A harsh cough, a lingering side effect of his treatment, shook his small frame as he clutched his cap tighter. The miniature American flag he'd been holding fluttered to ground as he used both hands to protect his dignity. Sarah's face transformed from concern to fury. "How dare you?" She reached for the man's camera strap, desperate to pull him away from her son. Watching from his position, Rivera noticed Jackson's flag fall to the ground. A small detail that wouldn't register to most, but to a soldier trained to observe everything, it was impossible to miss. The boy's defensive posture, the mother's distress, the fallen flag, all processed in an instant to the combat medic's trained eyes. In that moment, something shifted in Staff Sergeant Rivera's demeanor, a barely perceptible change that rippled through his rigid posture. Training dictated he maintain position until the demonstration's next phase. Any deviation would disrupt the carefully choreographed event and violate direct orders to maintain military bearing during public demonstrations. Yet, without warning, Rivera stepped away from his position. The movement was so unexpected that several spectators gasped. Phones raised higher to capture what everyone instantly recognized as an extraordinary breach of protocol. Rivera moved with purpose, each step deliberate as he approached the barrier where Jackson stood. The commanding officer, Major Daniels, noticed immediately. His microphone still active, his voice faltered mid-sentence as he watched his lead demonstrator break formation. The other medics maintained their positions, though their eyes betrayed their surprise. The photographer, still hovering over Jackson, froze when he noticed a combat medic heading directly toward them. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for Rivera, whose focused gaze never wavered from the confrontation ahead. "Is he allowed to do that?" Someone whispered loudly. Another replied, "Definitely not." In seconds, Rivera reached the barrier. Standing at 6'2", his frame imposing in full combat gear, he positioned himself directly in front of the photographer. Without a word, Rivera simply stared at the man, the intensity in his eyes conveying everything necessary. The photographer stammered, "I'm just doing my job," but his previous bravado evaporated under Rivera's unwavering gaze. Then, in a move that left onlookers breathless, Rivera knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Jackson's eye level. The metallic sound of his gear settling against the ground punctuated the silence that had fallen over the crowd. "Are you okay, young man?" Rivera asked, his voice gentle but clear. Jackson, stunned and wide-eyed, managed a small nod. "I dropped my flag," he whispered, pointing to the ground. Rivera retrieved the small flag, carefully dusted it off, and handed it back to Jackson. "What's your name, sir?" he asked with the same respect he would show a commanding officer. "Jackson," the boy replied, his voice stronger now. "I have leukemia. That's why I wear my hat." He added this last part quietly, as though sharing a secret. "I understand, Jackson," Rivera replied. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached into his medical pack and removed his combat medic patch. Every medic carries extra patches. "Would you like to have this one?" Jackson's eyes widened as he accepted the patch, his fingers tracing the insignia with reverence. Rivera continued, his voice still low enough that only those nearby could hear. "You know, in combat, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done despite being scared. From where I stand, you're showing more courage than many soldiers I've served with." The photographer, now thoroughly embarrassed, backed away from the scene. Several people had their phones trained on him, his earlier behavior captured for potential social media shaming. Jackson's mother, tears streaming down her face, mouthed, "Thank you," to Rivera, who acknowledged her with a respectful nod. The connection between the medic and the boy transcended the strict military protocols that Rivera had been trained to uphold unwaveringly. In that moment, the distinction between soldier and civilian, between military discipline and human compassion, blurred into something more profound than any training manual could capture. The extraordinary scene had barely registered with everyone when Major Daniels handed the microphone to his assistant and made his way toward Rivera. His expression was unreadable as he approached, his posture rigid with the authority of his rank. The crowd fell silent. Even those who weren't familiar with military protocol understood that Rivera had violated a fundamental rule. The question hanging in the air was clear. What would the consequences be? Sarah instinctively pulled Jackson closer as the commanding officer approached. Rivera, sensing his superior's presence, rose to his feet and snapped to attention, his face resuming its professional mask. "Staff Sergeant Rivera," Major Daniels said, his voice carrying in the silence. "Yes, sir," Rivera responded, eyes forward, preparing himself for the reprimand that would surely follow. Major Daniels surveyed the scene. The kneeling soldier, the tearful mother, the boy clutching the medic patch in one hand, his flag in the other, and the photographer who had slunk to the background. His gaze finally settled on Jackson. "Young man," the major addressed him directly. "What's your name?" "Jackson Miller, sir," the boy replied, trying to stand taller despite his fatigue. Major Daniels nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Rivera. Everyone expected a stern rebuke for breaking formation. The other demonstrators remained at attention, the entire event now on hold. Instead, Major Daniels did something unexpected. He removed his own cap and knelt beside Jackson. "Mr. Miller, I apologize for the disturbance today. Would you and your mother like a special viewing position for the rest of our demonstration?" Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. The major continued, "Staff Sergeant Rivera is one of our finest combat medics. His instincts have saved many lives in the field." He paused, looking directly at Rivera. Sometimes those instincts tell him when protocols need to be adjusted. Rising to his feet, Major Daniels addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's demonstration is about battlefield medicine, about making split-second decisions that can save lives. Sometimes that means following established procedures. Other times," he glanced meaningfully at Rivera, "it means recognizing when humanity must come first." With that, He instructed another soldier to escort Jackson and his mother to a special viewing area normally reserved for military families. As they were led away, the major turned to Rivera and spoke quietly, though those nearby could still hear. "Return to position, Sergeant." "Well done." Rivera saluted crisply and returned to formation, his face once again the picture of military discipline. But something had shifted in the atmosphere, a tension released, replaced by something warmer and more human. The demonstration resumed with renewed energy. From their new vantage point, Jackson and Sarah had a perfect view of the combat medics in action. Major Daniels continued his narration, explaining each procedure as the medics demonstrated battlefield triage, emergency airway management, and trauma care techniques. When it came time for Staff Sergeant Rivera to demonstrate chest seal application for penetrating wounds, he glanced briefly toward Jackson. "For this demonstration," he announced, deviating slightly from the script, "I'd like to explain how we adapt these techniques for different patients, including younger ones." The significance wasn't lost on Jackson, whose face lit up with recognition. As Rivera expertly demonstrated the modified technique, he incorporated explanations that made the medical concepts accessible even to a child. The other medics followed his lead, adding small clarifications that weren't in the original script but made the demonstration more inclusive. Meanwhile, security personnel had quietly approached the photographer who had caused a disturbance. Without creating another scene, they escorted him from the area, checking his credentials and explaining the military's policies on respecting all visitors. The man's protest died on his lips when he noticed how many phone cameras had documented his behavior. As the demonstration concluded, the medics lined up for a final salute. Major Daniels invited questions from the audience, and Jackson's hand shot up immediately. "Yes, young man," the major acknowledged, a smile warming his usually serious expression. Jackson's voice rang out clear despite his illness. "How do you stay brave when you're scared?" The question, simple yet profound, created a moment of reflection among the battle-hardened medics. Major Daniels looked to Rivera, giving him permission to answer. "That's an excellent question," Rivera responded. "The truth is we all get scared, but we focus on the person who needs our help rather than our own fear. In many ways, that's what you're doing right now with your own battle." After the formal ended, Rivera approached Jackson and Sarah. From his pocket, he produced a small combat medic's emergency whistle. "This was with me through 2 tours," he explained, placing it in Jackson's palm. "When things got tough, I'd remember that this whistle could bring help. Maybe it can remind you that you're not fighting alone either." Sarah, overwhelmed with emotion, finally let her tears flow freely. "I don't know how to thank you," she managed. Rivera shook his head. "No thanks needed, ma'am. Your son reminded all of us why we do what we do." As they prepared to leave, Jackson turned to Rivera and attempted a military salute. Though imperfect, the gesture carried genuine respect. Rivera returned the salute with formal precision, honoring the boy's courage. Other families and visitors applauded spontaneously, many wiping away tears of their own. In that moment, the Tactical Medical Training Center felt less like a military facility and more like a place where genuine human connection had transcended regulations and reminded everyone of the deeper purpose behind the uniform. By evening, videos of the encounter had flooded social media platforms. One clip, capturing the moment Rivera knelt beside Jackson, garnered over 3 million views within hours. The hashtags #MedicHero and #CourageComesFirst trended nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, with headlines celebrating Rivera's compassionate decision to break protocol. Military blogs and veteran groups shared the video as an example of the human side of service that often goes unseen by civilians. The Army, recognizing the overwhelming positive response, issued an official statement. While the U.S. Army upholds the highest standard of discipline and protocol, we also train our soldiers to exercise judgment and compassion. Staff Sergeant Rivera's actions today exemplified the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. We are proud of how he represented the combat medic tradition. Some military traditionalists question whether allowing such exceptions might undermine discipline, but they were vastly outnumbered by supporters who saw in Rivera's actions the very best of what military service should represent. For Jackson and his family, the impact was deeply personal. His mother later shared in an interview that her son had experienced a renewed determination in his cancer treatment. He keeps the medic patch and whistle on his bedside table, she explained. On difficult days, he looks at them and says, "Medics don't quit, so I won't either." The training center reported a surge in interest from young people considering military medical careers. Major Daniels implemented a new component to their public demonstrations, highlighting not just the technical skills of combat medicine, but also the compassion and judgment required in field situations. As for Staff Sergeant Rivera, he received hundreds of letters from military families, cancer patients, and fellow service members. When asked about his split-second decision to break protocol, he simply said, "In that moment, I saw someone who needed help. That's what combat medics do. We help. Everything else is secondary." The moment provided a rare window into military culture for civilians, sparking discussions about when rules should bend in service of deeper principles, not just in the military, but in society at large. Jackson's encounter with Staff Sergeant Rivera reminds us that sometimes the bravest acts require breaking from convention, when compassion and protocol conflict, which should prevail. Has someone ever broken the rules to help you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that highlight extraordinary moments of human connection in unexpected places.